Hello, cello and bass players. Today we are going to go through how to play Hedwig's theme from Harry Potter. This is a video for both cello and bass because your music is going to look very similar. The only difference is that some of the fingering on top will look a little bit different. But as you can see, I'm actually using a viola for this video just because space-wise in my house I don't have much space to set up a cello and record, and I don't actually have a bass. So you might have to fill in some of the gaps with things that we've learned in class, but I still hope going through this is helpful. This music that is on the screen right now you can find on Smart Music, and it's actually part of a larger collection of tunes from the first 5 Harry Potter movies. So if I click up here, you can see a lot of different tunes that if you were interested, you could go back and learn some of those as well, and we might do a future video on those. But today we're focused on Hedwig's theme. And so let's take a look at our music here. The first 2 things that you should always look at in a new piece of music is the time signature and the key signature. So if we look over here, our time signatures in 3/4. That means we're going to have 3 quarter notes in every measure. And you probably, if you're familiar with this piece, know it's relatively fast. So we might slow it down a little bit today. Just because we're learning it. If you eventually decide to play it with Smart Music, up here the tempo is set at 160 beats per minute, which again is quite fast. I might recommend that you bump it down to even 110 the first time, and then increase that tempo as you feel comfortable with playing it faster. If you look at our key signature, we only have F sharps. So thinking about finger patterns, when I see that I only have an F sharp, I think about my A string. C is going to be 2 fingers instead of the usual 3 if I'm a cello. And if I'm a bass, it's going to be 2 fingers for C natural instead of 4 for C sharp. So that's kind of what that key signature tells us. We're going to go phrase by phrase, or musical sentence, one musical sentence at a time, starting from where we come in here on this B. What I'll do is I'll play each phrase and then kind of discuss some of the things that make it challenging that you might have to look out for if you're playing it on your own. So I'm going to go from this B right here all the way to this B. Okay? It's going to sound like this. Sorry about that. Since I'm playing viola, I read alto clef for a minute there. But a couple of little things that make this challenging. There are 2 measures where there is a double up bow. So from this E to this B, and also from this F sharp, this D to this F natural. So it's double up bows to keep in mind there. Nothing too challenging, but it's just good to point out. You also will note that this F natural is an accidental. It doesn't follow the key signature, so that means that the composer has said, I want this note to be natural. Whatever it says in the measure trumps the key signature. So that is a 2-finger note for an F natural. And the last thing to note, we've been talking about these in class. This symbol that looks like a slur we know is actually called a tie because it's connecting 2 notes that are the same pitch, and so we add the note values together to see how long the note is going to be. This is a 3-beat note tied to a 2-beat note. 3 plus 2 is 5. That's going to be a 5-beat note, and we'll actually see that quite a bit as we work through this piece. So again, the first phrase is relatively straightforward. Moving on to our next phrase, by the way, you might notice that these all start on a pickup or the note previous, the beat in the previous measure, the 3rd beat in the previous measure. So that's why we're not starting at the beginning of the measure, we're starting on the pickup. So it goes from this B right here all the way to this E, and it's going to sound like this. So a couple of things in here. Now this is the cello part that we're looking at, and they've actually indicated that you could shift for this. I actually personally don't think that's super necessary. If you want to get the practice shifting, you can, but you can actually do this all in first position and be fine. Of course, for bass, you do have to shift. And you should be used to shifting to these notes for bass. It shouldn't be anything too challenging. So a couple of things to check out. Again, we have a C sharp here as an accidental. So if you're in first position cellos, that's going to be 3 fingers. It goes right away to a C natural in the next measure. So it goes from 3 to 2, or if you're a bass, 4 to 2. And you might be wondering why this natural sign is in parentheses. That's something called a courtesy accidental, which means based on the rules of music, you already should know that that note is natural. Anytime there's an accidental in the measure, the following measure, the key signature resets. So we knew that this was a natural note, but it's a courtesy accidental. The arranger kind of put that in to remind you. Okay. We also have a G sharp here. If you're a cello, you'll remember that we've been working on these extensions in class where you have your first finger, you stretch your second finger so that it's in the same spot that 3 normally is. So if we're looking at the D string, this would be on an F sharp. And that allows your fourth finger to stretch even more to get a half step higher than usual. So it hits a G sharp. That's how you're going to play that note. Bass is going to be low 1. So just making sure you know how to play that note. And over here we have a note called A sharp, which you probably already know by a different name. A sharp is the same thing as B flat, and a beat there, they sound exactly the same. It's two different names for the same thing. If your B is here on cello, B flat is going to be back here. Okay, and it's the same thing as A sharp. So that's how you're going to play it. On bass, B is 4 fingers, so B flat is 2 fingers. Okay, so that looks harder than it is, but that's how you play that note. And then we have a low A sharp, and again, you can think of your low B flat. So cellos on the G string, 2 fingers rather than 3, right? And bass on the A string, 2 fingers rather than 4. Okay, those are some kind of strange things about that phrase. Moving on, we're going to go right here. This is the pickup to measure 33 all the way to here, to this B. This is the next phrase. It's more of the same stuff. Nothing new, really new in here. Sounds like this. 4, 5. Like I said, more of the same stuff. Something kind of neat is that you go from this A sharp or B flat up to a B natural. So there's a nice half step there, and you'll be able to tell if you're playing it correctly because you'll hear that half step like this. Other than that, it's nothing too challenging. And then we'll move on to the last phrase of this section, from this G all the way down to this E. Now you take a look at this very long note. This has 4 ties, or this is tying 4 notes together. If you're quick with your math facts, these are 3-beat notes for 4 measures. So 3 times 4 is 12 beats, or you can count 3, 6, 9, 12. So you're going to hold a very long 12-beat note when you get there. So I'm going right from this G. It's going to sound like this. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, so as you can see, this top half of the piece is just 4 phrases that use a lot of the same notes as each other. So once you get those kind of weird notes down, it shouldn't be too hard to put together. I would go through each phrase the way I just did and then try to put them together. If we go to the last bit of this piece, these last 3 lines, it's really the character of the piece changes here. And not only the character changes, but also the key signature and the time signature. So our new time signature is what we call cut time. And some of our lesson groups have gotten to this and others have not. So for the sake of the people who haven't gotten to this, we're going to say that basically this feels like a very, very fast 4/4. We're going to kind of ignore the cut time and just say that we're counting it in a fast 4. And we see now that our F sharp has disappeared. So every note, unless otherwise marked, is natural. You have, if you are playing along with the accompaniment on smart music, you have 8 measures to kind of adjust to this new tempo. And then we go start on this E. Now, this fingering is recommending that you do something called half position, and I actually think it's a good thing to try. So we're going to talk about doing half position here. And if you'd prefer to do it in first, that's okay, but I think this would be a good thing for everyone to give a try at least once. So half position basically means that you normally have your hand here in first position, and half position is a lower. So you're going to take your first finger and back it up a half step. Okay, so if we're looking at the D string, normally your first finger is on the note E. But if you were to back it up a half step, it would play the note D sharp or E flat, and that would allow your second finger to go right next to it and play the note E. So your second finger is where your first finger normally is. Okay, and you can see that they're suggesting that in this piece of music because you play a bunch of E's and then a D sharp and then an E. And then the next note is an F natural, which is, again, just a half step higher. So that would be your third finger, which would go right down next to it. Bass, it would be your fourth finger, right? But it would go down right next to it. And that would be your fingering for that measure. You wouldn't have to shift back and forth to catch those low first fingers. You're just in half position, and it just makes it a little bit easier. So I think that's something to try. When you put it together, it sounds like this. So remember, you're playing this E with your second finger. I started a little bit low. Let me do that one more time. There's a good E. Okay, and I took this E right here, that's where I took the opportunity to shift back to first position. And I actually would play this C in first position as well. I don't think there's a need to shift any higher or to shift more for that. But as you can see, that half position just makes things a little bit smoother. If we keep going to measure 61 and 62, there is a C sharp in here. Again, that's using that extended position where you're going to stretch with your fourth finger. Just a regular fourth finger for bass, but for cellos, you have to stretch a little bit. 61 and 62 sounds like this. Okay, so A, C, and then D sharp or E flat. Okay. Again, relatively straightforward through this. We do have, for bass, a low F natural, which is a low one, and then an open E. You don't get to play that too often, so that's kind of neat. For cellos, we don't play these notes off very often either. This is 4 fingers and 3 fingers on the C string, so getting a little practice with your C string. I'm going to keep going here. I'm actually just going to play through to the end. So then we go to half position again. Rest. Okay, there is a high E bass. Again, you should be pretty comfortable shifting to this. Cellos, that's going to be up in third position. Okay, so your first finger goes where your D normally goes, and then you can play it with 3 fingers. Or they have also given you a different suggestion here, which wouldn't be, it's a different way than what we've learned, but it actually works just as well, if not better. You're going to shift up to what I call sometimes third and a half position. So your fourth finger would normally play the note G on the D string, but instead of going to that G, you're going to go up an extra half step to G sharp. And if you do that, your high E on the A string will be with your second finger right next to where your first finger is. So it kind of helps to give you a reference. It's a little harder to get up to that G sharp and then pop over to get the E. But if you wanted to shift early, that would be a good thing to do. So you can pick whatever way makes the most sense for you. And then they've indicated that you can stay shifted up for these notes if you feel more comfortable going back down to play first finger E and then open A. If you're a cello, that's okay to do. For bass, it would be 1-1. So kind of a little bit, you have an opportunity to choose what is more comfortable for you, depending on how much shifting you've done, how comfortable you are with it, and what just feels best for you. Let me play through these 2 lines all together as a cohesive group. I've done them 2 measures at a time, so I want you to hear what this sounds like. It's a little bit hard to find that half position, so you really have to make sure you're on the right note before you go. Here it is. Rest. So that's all the way through this piece. Remember, if you go to Smart Music, you can actually play through it with a really cool accompaniment. It's kind of like having an orchestra behind you. And you can also record your take and send it to me. I hope this was helpful. Thanks for being patient as I kept trying to read viola with the cello and bass music, but we made it through. And I would love to hear one of your takes if you want to record it and send it to me so I can hear how you're doing.